you don't need an alternative for a collapse. The Roman Empire didn't surrender to some German ideology. It just collapsed from its own inner rot.
If you've been asking yourself, what is happening lately? An assassination attempt, a new presidential candidate, extreme politics across the globe, well, my guest today might have the answer. Martin Gurri is a former CIA analyst and author of The Revolt of the Public and the Crisis of Authority in the New Millennium. This fascinating book, written back in 2014 and since updated, lays out the reasons for the changes we all feel happening around us. Before we start, please be sure to subscribe to this channel and leave us a comment after you've listened. My name is Ed D'Agostino from Malden Economics. Welcome to Global Macro Update. I'm fascinated by your book. Your first edition came out in 2014, and you wrote how we would be living through the revolt of the public, which is the name of your book. A time when the public no longer trusts elites or the institutions that they run, such as the media and government, and that this would be driven by what you call the tsunami of information. And that information has effects. Can you set the stage for this conversation by explaining that a little bit?
I always say that I had probably the least sexy job at CIA. I didn't have the license to kill. I was an analyst of global media. And for many, many years, that was a fun job, but very straightforward. There was very little open information, right? So around the turn of the century, not just me, but those of us who were in this particular field noticed this sudden, tremendous transformation of the information sphere, gigantic volumes, and there's data to prove it. You can look it up in the book. The year 2001, double the amount of information was produced that had been produced by the entire human race from the cave paintings and the dawn of culture until now. 2002, double 2001. So that was, of course, those of us who were writing analysis based on that information went a little crazy. It's like, now what do we do? Where do we find what's real, what's false, what's good, what's bad? Who are these people? Where do they come from? And it occurred to us, some of us, that was the wrong question. The question was, what are the effects that this tsunami is having? The information structure is like the landscape, right? Our institutions evolve in that way, or if you will, it's like the stage and the props that get set, and you can only play certain plays given the structure. All right, and this tsunami was rolling. This immense thing was rolling across the world, and as different countries digitized differently, different times, you could see behind it these tremendous, what you said, effects, information effects, tremendous social and political turbulence. Now, that was a while back, and it sounds very naive. It is naive, I suppose, but we all wondered, so, okay, what's that got to do? This is a communications device, the internet. What's that got to do with, a revolt in Egypt, for example? And that question, by the way, we placed it to our masters in CIA, and they didn't see any connection. They thought, no, this is completely irrelevant. So when I left the government a few years later, I decided to write my book. This is really irrelevant. Well, by then we had the Arab Spring, and it was 100% evident that the two things are massively connected. And that if you looked at what was going on here, and what was going on in so many different places, the character of the revolt of the public. But the flip side of that, probably the more important side, which is the subtitle of the book, which is the crisis of authority of the institutions. These institutions that basically had spoken from on high, and we had accepted as authoritative. Suddenly everybody saw their mistakes, saw their self-centeredness, saw their condescension, didn't like either how competent they were or how self-interested they were. So the bond of trust was broken. And when you pile all these things together, you have a super chaotic situation. You have what Jonathan Haidt calls it, the Tower of Babel. We all kind of got put in the Tower of Babel. Suddenly, we all start speaking different languages. We are living in different worlds. What's true for you isn't true for me. So that, in short, is the gist of the book. I think I was helped by a lot of friends at CIA in coming to the initial realization. And then afterwards, I was helped by the fact that what I thought was possible became real in geopolitics with the Arab Spring and the indignados in Spain and the occupied people. And then I was helped bizarrely by, I'm like a Donald Trump profiteer. Shortly after the book was self-published, Trump became a thing, and everybody was looking for explanations. And the book kind of explains how that is possible. I didn't predict anything. You're right about that. But I explain what is going on. I mean, it's hard enough to explain the present. The future, forget it. And this particular present, is pretty complicated.
The other interesting thing about it, when you say we, you're not just talking about what's happening in the United States. And you give so many examples of the start of what sort of has been labeled populism. It doesn't seem like a very good label for what's happening.
Yeah, I hate that word. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't seem right, but it's everywhere. And since you've written the book, it just is continuing with Meloni, with Milei in Argentina. Yes. I mean, it's not a unique to the U.S. phenomenon, which lends credence to your theory, I think.
We Americans, I guess because our culture, we're not just a powerful country, we're a powerful culture. And the more you travel abroad, the more you realize that it's like we own the world culturally, not politically, not militarily, but culturally. So we can be very insular, very provincial, and not, why Trump? And everybody agonizes, or if you're on the other side, why Biden? And you see the same thing unrolling across the world. All you need is eyes to see it, the interest to look, right? I was in Argentina recently, and I mean, the Milei thing is really quite amazing. In France, I was lucky enough, again, I'm kind of like Dr. Death, when things go bad, everybody comes to me. When they had the yellow vests in France, this was something that the French, I mean, I am very familiar with France, and I've been there many times, and can read French and kind of hack my way through speaking it. The French always feel like you don't understand us. We're way better than you think, and we know ourselves. And you Americans are. And with the yellow vests, they just didn't know what they had in their hands. And they looked at my book, and lucky for me, I ended up going to France like 3 times in one summer, just trying to explain to them, this is what's going on. You guys are not unique either. It's happening in many other places. So it is global. It doesn't happen everywhere. Every country, every society has its own dynamic, but it is inherent in all countries that are modern, democratic, and even not, and obviously digitized. I mean, if you're North Korea, you probably don't have this problem very much, but even the Cubans that have a massive online presence now. The Cubans have all fled online, and it's like a Greek tragedy reading the Cuban stuff because they're all very unhappy.
You talk in the book about how you can be a society that has access to a lot of information, and those societies tend to get prosperous. Or the elite, the people in charge, can decide that they want no information to be led into the country, and you end up with North Korea, very, very poor country. China's sort of in the middle. How does China fit in with this narrative in your mind?
That's called a dictator dilemma, right? If you're a dictator, the one way you can become legitimate is by showering prosperity on the public. But to shower prosperity, you need to open up society and open up communications. And when you do that, suddenly you put yourself in peril of people who are against you gaining a voice. So I think the Chinese have just been very adept at managing the inherent risks of this tsunami. I think the culture, number one, helps them very much. I think that the Chinese culture tends to be very cohesive, and dissonant voices are not looked on as heroic. whistleblowers, but as troublemakers. So that's just culture aside from the government. But also, they have been very good at creating prosperity. And the moment that stops, or the moment that the public in China feels it doesn't want the system anymore. I mean, you got to the edge of that during COVID. During COVID, you could see there. I was always told, no, they have controls and they have false voices in the internet, and everybody knows everything, and they have this social control system. I said, all that is true, but they have the web big time. And the second the public feels like they're unhappy, the government is in trouble. Well, the government said, we're going to do zero COVID. We're going to put you people in your apartment buildings for as long as that takes. People were literally jumping off of balconies, just committing suicide. And suddenly you see all these images online of people saying, down with communism and down with Xi and down with this. And like literally within a day of that, the Chinese government goes, hey, we have achieved zero COVID.
Lo and behold.
We're moving all the restriction away. I mean, literally within days of that. They were terrified. They never said it, but they were terrified. So they've been good at giving prosperity. And I have personal experience with people who have told me, yeah, I mean, I hate the system, but you know what? I have a degree from Harvard. I'm a millionaire. And my grandfather slept with his pigs in the hut, So they've been successful at that. But if ever there is a big economic slowdown, and there seems to be one happening now, or some other misstep along the lines of the total COVID idea, the public in China will rise up, and the government will be in trouble.
I want to talk about some of the recent events that have happened in this country, because there certainly have been
Must we?
several. I think we have to, unfortunately. One of the things you write about is that we live in sort of a transformed world. But we still think in maybe outdated terms like liberal and conservative.
Yes.
So a few things. Last week, Peggy Noonan in the Wall Street Journal wrote about how we watched the Republican Party become completely transformed. First with an assassination attempt that was survived, and then immediately after that with the convention. And arguably a very successful, well-organized convention. And it was a Trumpian takeover of the Republican Party. I think a lot of Republicans, or people that used to identify as Republicans, now feel that it's completely different than it was 10 years ago. And they're right. Then we had President Biden step aside, not going for re-election. Bobby Kennedy Jr. is now an independent and is polling, depending on which poll you look at, around 15-16%. Is this the sign of a nation without a viable political system? How do you interpret everything that's been happening over the past few weeks?
I refuse to answer that question on the grounds that I can only sound stupid if I try. We are in a moment of turbulence. I said that. And it seems to me during the Biden years, starting from about 2020, before Biden, with the Black Lives Matter riots, all the way to fairly recently, there was this imposition of certain ideas having to do with identity and climate change and so forth. And they were, including a censorship apparatus imposed on social media. I mean, that is, you can see who I am. I'm not a young man. And unprecedented in my lifetime that the government could say, don't allow that man to speak on that platform. And that platform would say, okay, he's out. All right. Unprecedented in my lifetime. I think for the last, I'm not good at timing on this, but say a year, that has shifted. It's a whole talk about the shift in the vibe, what the people call it. But I mean, it's been real slow. And the way these processes tend to work, and they're always either hampered or assisted and then sped up by events. It's all very contingent. But the way it works is what the character in Hemingway, who was asked how he went bankrupt, and then he said slowly, and then all of a sudden, right? And that's what we have now. We have this kind of failure cascade that hits, and maybe failure is the wrong word, but we do have a cascade of events. in this particular case, which none of us can tell where it's going to end. None of us can tell. I mean, things are happening so fast, and the implications are so opaque. I think you can say that the Biden presidency has been a total failure. I mean, you don't kind of abandon ship as president in the weird manner that he did. By the way, if you want to talk about the weird digital age, a tweet, which is the platform of his most hated social media person, Elon Musk. He tweets a little photo of a document saying, I'm not going to run for president anymore. And we haven't seen him. So we've gone from kind of like a Weekend at Bernie's presidency to sort of a death of Stalin presidency. Everybody's going to wonder, is this guy even still around? Is he going to live? Is he not? So I guess we can say it's been a failure. We don't know, though, whether Kamala Harris can pull that failure out of the muck and get a new, essentially a third Obama term for the same ideas. I doubt it because the ideas have gone out of favor. But if she runs a smart campaign, she could. So Trump is a political mutant. I don't know if you ever read the Foundation books by Isaac Asimov, based on this idea of psychohistory, where you can predict the future in great broad terms, except there's this one person who's a mutant, literally a mutant. And so there was no way you could have predicted that person by psychohistory. Well, all our psychohistorians today are kind of scratching their heads and going, where'd Trump come from? What the heck is he? Well, he's a mutant. He's something that by definition is unlabeled and impossible to describe in any kind of generic term. That he has taken over the Republican Party, that is true. And I think in a social sense, that's very clear what that means, okay? In the sense that there's a different class of people now that are in charge, far more working class oriented, far more Rust Belt oriented, far more internet oriented and informal. I mean, what I think they did well at that convention was made it very informal. All kinds of popular culture people appeared. But what it means politically, what Trump means politically, I think it depends on any given minute when he's talking, right? Because he says almost anything. So what that means politically, we will see. I don't think we can predict.
You wrote about how Trump is arguably a nihilist, right? Just sort of has no theory or philosophy or political orientation.
Yeah, I think rhetorically he is definitely a nihilist. He's somebody who talks as if institutions and history and traditions and customs didn't exist. He just talks right through them. I'm not sure that in his actions you can say he's a nihilist. I mean, we had 4 years of his government, and he either succeeded or failed. Some parts succeeded, some part didn't. But it wasn't a nihilistic administration, I didn't think. I would say that Biden was far more nihilistic.
Oh, interesting. Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. When you impose censorship on social media, when you prosecute your political opponents as criminals, you label certain ideological strands you don't like as domestic terrorists. I mean, that's pretty nihilistic in our system, I would think.
How do you see polarization factoring in your process? Because I've had this conversation with Frank Luntz, who's a noted pollster, and I feel like neither party really is a home for me anymore. I sort of have always considered myself to live in the middle, and the parties are moving more to the edges. Is this a symptom of this information age?
Yeah, see, I would kind of dispute that, and I'm more or less where you are. By the way, I haven't actually voted in the last two presidential elections. I think I will this time, but I haven't in the last two because I basically opted out. I'm homeless politically.
Yeah, I get it.
I think polarization is a function of our system where everybody gets heaped on one side or the other side. I don't think we're polarized at all. I think we're fractured. We're fragmented. I think if you look at each one of those parties, there's like about 3 or 4 sex and war bands, at least in each one of them, and they hate each other more. I mean, get Mitt Romney on the subject of Donald Trump, or it appears get Joe Biden on the subject of Barack Obama, and you get a lot of loathing there. So I don't think we are. I think it's just I think the need to appear very extreme is definitely a function of the digital age, because when you have the Tower of Babel effect, you need to shriek louder than anybody else. You need to call attention to yourself, and by being hostile, you do that. If somebody else responds in kind, I mean, this was what Trump did in his first term. Somebody else responds in kind. Now everybody starts lining up behind you saying, "Oh, I hate that person." No, you're our chief, and you go out there and yell at them, and suddenly you're, the head of a war band that's out there beating up on the enemy. So that the structure of our communication is very extreme for that reason. It is a question for me, honestly. It is a question for me how much of that anger and rage and noise is sincere and felt, and how much is just a rhetorical device. There was an era in the Elizabethan era, lovers would send sonnets to their beloveds. I'm pretty sure they did not speak in sonnets, right? It was just a convention. You were supposed to write a sonnet to your beloved. I think nowadays everybody expects you to be angry and yell a lot. And I'm not sure how sincere that is.
Does this tie in a little bit with what you wrote about the center and the border?
Yeah.
And how the border would challenge what was happening in the center, but that the border, they like to blow things up, but they don't actually want to govern.
The border and the center are sociological terms, and so they're arbitrarily defined, but you can apply them to various situations. The border is sectarian. If you look at sectarian institutions, they want to be pure, in other words. So if you disagree with what's going on inside your sect, what happens is not that there's a kind of let's do a consensus. No, you set up your own sect, you split up. So there's always splintering going on in the sectarian world, and you exist to be against the center. The center is corruption, right? So the idea that you would take over the center and become the center is the greatest abomination you can imagine for a sectarian. The center, of course, is composed of all the institutions, and it's slow, and it's plotting, and it is corrupt, and it is unimaginative, and it doesn't appeal much it doesn't make anybody's heart beat faster. So we have these two models, which I think fit the internet pretty well. The internet is the home of the sectarian mind, and the old world is the home of the great central institutions that still live as if the 21st century had never happened.
You wrote about authoritarianism, that it appears to be advancing. And there are those that say that democracy is dying. That seems to be an ever increasingly popular rallying chant right now. A lot of the older type of elites that you write about are saying that, but you've written that you don't believe that's the case. Where do you stand on authoritarianism today, given that Vladimir Putin is still advancing in Ukraine?
Yeah, he's not advancing very far. Well, I would say this. Vladimir Putin, who is a horrible dictator, is a whole sight better than the Soviet Union, which was there before, okay? So the same way that, Xi's dictatorship in China, although very complete, much more so than Putin's, it's still nothing like the Cultural Revolution, all right, in China. But more importantly, I mean, there's a couple of ways to look at this. One is, how is democracy doing? Well, it appears to be in trouble because why? Well, because we have this tsunami of information that has slammed into democratic institutions as well as every other kind of institution, and they don't know what to make of it, and they're not trying real hard. So there's that. But the other way, which is what I prefer to do, I come from Cuba, so I was. By the time I was 10, I had lived through a right-wing dictator and a left-wing totalitarian dictatorship, all right? And then my dad, thankfully, got us out of that place. So I have that perspective. I know what it feels like, and I know when something is about to collapse, and I know when there is no loyalty. And unfortunately, in this country, the people who should be, promoting democracy, not abroad, but in people's minds, all you hear is how racist we are and how, we're destroying the earth. So there's the people who are supposed to be managing the system seem to hate it. But what's the alternative is what I always say. All right. I'm not a young man. There used to be alternatives. My parents lived through, my father said there's a moment we thought the Germans were going to conquer the world. And so the Nazis were a profound alternative to liberal democracy. The Cold War, through which I lived, and part of it in CIA all the way to the end, I can tell you that system appealed to some of the best human beings ever. It was a terrible, murderous system, but it had this way of appealing to good people who sacrificed their lives for this terrible system, this terrible cause. All of that is gone. All of that is gone. There is one. Okay, you can't have a fight with. There's only one guy in the ring. All right, and right now that's liberal democracy. So even Putin, even the Chinese, even the Cubans have to have these mock elections, right? They have to pretend to be like a liberal democracy to acquire any kind of legitimacy. So until somebody, I would say this, on the bad side, which is you don't need an alternative for a collapse, right? The Roman Empire didn't surrender to some German ideology. It just collapsed from its own inner rot, and everybody came and fed on the corpse. So it is possible for a system to collapse without a rival, but I don't think we're there. I think we're in a moment of turbulence. The dictatorships are just as turbulent as the democracies. It's just generally modern life has been made that much more complicated by this overabundance of information. And of the systems that we had, only democracy stands.
I want to come back to what you said about Cuba and go deeper into that. But before we do, I want to wrap up sort of with what you think might be next here. 'Cause we've left, for the most part, the industrial age, and all of our systems and our framework were built during that age. We've moved into this fifth wave that you describe,
Yes.
the information age, and we don't have a framework. We don't have systems, and we don't trust the old elites to lead us into this new system. Is there a new set of elites needed? And if so, are they starting to emerge?
In part, that's the answer, I think. Kamala Harris is being touted as the youthful face of American politics. She's 59 years old, right? She was a middle-aged person when the internet came around. So, yes, we need new elites that are, we've seen, like Trump, weirdly enough, for a boomer, he's very good online. And like Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez had her moment. I think she's sort of like faded, but she showed how you can do this, and you do it not by being a kind of a Fidel Castro oratory type style, but you show. I mean, she used to give like nail polish classes or something, on Instagram, and so she became a very human individual. She showed an aspect of herself, personal aspect of herself, that most politicians wouldn't share. So there are ways in which the next wave of politicians can bridge the gap. But there has to be, in a representative system, some sort of identity between those who are represented and the ruling class, right? And there's no identity right now. They all seem like aliens from outer space, So if you at least think that's a person kind of like me, which is, by the way, weirdly enough, part of Trump's appeal, then you have overcome one obstacle. I think there have to be also structural changes, though. I think government has to learn to go digital. And of course, we could spend many days talking about that. But let me tell you, I was there when the digital moment happened. And you cannot imagine a more stupid response than that of government. It tries desperately. It's not for lack of trying. It just doesn't understand what it's got. It's got a hammer in its hand, and it thinks it's something for putting on your head, and it keeps hurting you because why am I hurting? Because it thinks it's a hat. So it has no idea what you can do with the internet in terms of reaching out to the population, for example, so that you can then feed back a lot of your actions, both the bureaucracy and, say, Congress. You can feed back a lot of your actions and have these vast conversations that can be managed, as Wikipedia does. And people will feel like, well, they heard my two bits when it came to that law, or, the Department of Energy heard me about that, my request to dig an oil well or whatever. I think that should be done. The Estonians have done it to some degree, the only nation, but they're like, they're smaller than where I live. They're smaller than Fairfax County, where I live in Virginia.
India has made great strides in terms of digitization.
India is beginning that way. Yeah. So it's happening slowly. And maybe it's just as well to let other countries, try and fail, and then we'll pick out the best. But we should be trying. And all I can tell you is our federal government is incredibly bad at digital. Incredibly bad.
It's interesting that you say they have to go digital too. It touches on one of the things that I'm starting to notice, and I'm somewhat concerned about. It feels like Silicon Valley entrepreneurs are seeing a void. They're seeing that there is a void in the elite structure and the political structure, and they're starting to move into it in both parties. I'm noticing it more on the Republican side, where you have like the all-in podcast guys and David Sachs, sort of Elon Musk coming out in favor of Trump. But you also have guys like Mark Cuban on the other side, very tech-savvy, politically active individual. What are your thoughts on that? Or is the tech illiterati sort of going to at least attempt to fill that void? And is that a good thing? It's a curveball, I know.
No, that's a very good question. It's a very good question. I'll just give you speculation, and based on my experience, is these are people who could never survive in the political world. The political world will suck the air out of their atmosphere, and they will fall gasping to the ground. All right. These are people who are disruptors, who are, and I know some of them, by the way, who are brilliant in a way that is very intimidating. It would be very intimidating here in Washington, near where I live, who gets things done. When my book was just coming out, I went to San Francisco, and I ended up in some pretty mighty names' houses because they wanted to talk, And I thought to myself afterwards, in Washington, this would have taken so much protocol, and then at the end, somehow, the very last loop, I needed to. Oh, sorry, no, he's going to a trip, and that's canceled. Over here in Washington, it's all protocol. Silicon Valley is all about doing. All right, it's still that, even though it's gotten a lot more middle-aged, let's say, and a little more conservative in the social sense, but it's still about breaking things, and I think that there has been a part of this tipping over of the change in the vibe. There has been a group of people for whom being associated with Trump probably would have meant being ostracized by a whole lot of their buddies who just said, the hell with it, we're going to do it anyway because we don't like the other side so much. And there has always been, going back to Obama days, there has always been a large contingent of Silicon Valley that just goes back and forth between the Democratic Party, the White House, whatnot. That's been going on for years. So I think it allowed Biden those kind of contacts before Musk bought Twitter. It allowed Biden to censor social media. They were happy to do it. They felt like they were being told by the government what they wanted to do anyway, right? So it's all the same kind of person. But could they take over that governmental role? No.
And you think that the infrastructure of DC is just too entrenched for the rule breakers to sort of restructure?
It's just the culture. I mean, and it really, honestly, this is a particularly terrible elite class, and they're particularly bad at what they do. Okay, but honestly, you have to go back to the framers of the Constitution, right? They meant it to be kind of a labyrinth to get anything done. They meant for it. For every force, there's got to be a counterforce. All right, so that way nothing gets done that is rushed or thoughtless or whatever. So the system encourages that. And if on top of that, you have a very timid, very conformistic, very incompetent ruling class, political class, then everything is going to freezes in place. This is truly a conservative place, all right? Truly a conservative place in the sense that they don't want anything to change.
Well, I'm glad that you think that liberal democracy still has a fighting chance.
Yep.
We've been trying to understand what's happening. That's the question that I think a lot of us have been asking for the last several years. It's just what's going on here. And we've looked into my friend John Malden. He's a student of Neil Howe's Fourth Turning book, which is sort of about generational cycles. George Friedman is a geopolitical analyst who we're friendly with, his latest book is called The Storm Before the Calm, and it's about political and socioeconomic cycles. Peter Turkin writes about cycles around the elites. But your book really, and I want to give it a plug here, The Revolt of the Public. It all clicked for me when I read this. So I think you've done a real service with this book, and I would highly encourage everyone to pick it up. But having said that, I want to talk about one of my favorite places, physical places on Earth, which is where you're from, Cuba. I was lucky enough to go there a couple of years ago as part of a group. It was January of 2022. It was an officially approved group, fell under an educational exchange, but it was really organized by the Cuban government. We were trotted around as a small group of investors. Mm-hmm. We met with the head of the central bank. We met with the head, or the deputy head of the Ministry of Finance. We met with the gentleman in charge of U.S.-Cuba relations. And the message was very coordinated. It was very consistent. It was, we have the right to choose our own form of government, and you should respect that. But having said that, we want to work with you. Frankly, we need your help. Our people are suffering. And it was, when you're there, and then you end the day with a few mojitos and some lovely food that no one else on the island has the privilege of having, it's quite a compelling message. Being from Cuba, how do you see our relations in the island?
They were right that they needed help desperately. The pauperization of Cuba is an amazing story that doesn't get told. But of course, it was that form of government that they have chosen, that they have the right to choose, even though it has not been confirmed by any vote anywhere.
Right. No one's choosing.
It is that form of government that has caused that pauperization. I mean, I remember having a conversation way back when, during the Cold War, with a Hungarian diplomat, who of course was completely anti-communist. And he said, he'd just gone to Cuba. He said, there's a place where you drop a seed in the ground and you get a crop. It's one of the most fertile lands in the world, right? And food is being rationed. Now, today, that was a long time ago, today, the Cuban government buys all the food for the island. It doesn't grow scarcely anything, all right? It has to buy all the energy for the island. It actually could do better. And the infrastructure, for example, for energy and for food production and distribution, it's all breaking down. So it's getting worse. All right. There are these tremendous blackouts. 50% of the time you get no energy, even in Havana, which is privileged, right? Mm-hmm. So if you are an old person and you're downstairs, when the blackouts happen, you can't take the elevator and you are too old to walk 8 flights of steps. You're stuck out on the street. Right? If you're a mom and you got milk for your kids, in the refrigerator and the blackouts happen, that milk goes bad and you can't feed your kids. If you have an operation, the hospital closes down. In the year, I think it was 2023, maybe 22, something like 25% fewer operations were performed than the year before. No reason other than the blackouts. So you have this terror, and if the Cuban population has gone online, and it reads like a tragedy. There are people who are literally losing their minds. The heat of Cuba is pretty serious, and they're in the middle of the night. It's black as night, black as pitch, and they're hot. Everybody's out. They're desperate. There's no end to it. It's all tied not to some technological breakdown, but to a political system that nobody has the courage to overthrow for very good reasons. So meanwhile, the political system has evolved from this revolutionary sort of like one-man rule to a mafia, a complete mafia. Nobody believes in communism anymore. And these people are very worried. They can see that the country is collapsing under their feet, and they figure there's going to come a time that they're going to have to get out of there. So they've created these sort of pseudo private enterprises, small and medium sized enterprises, and it looks like they're giving a concession to capitalism. Completely the opposite. These are the means for these people to suck all currency out of the island, which they then send out to Spain, Mexico, even the United States. Somebody got caught, I think if we were in Florida somewhere, sneaking in hundreds of thousands, $4 million total of dollars from Cuba. So the country needs to buy its food and energy with foreign currency, and all the foreign currency is being sucked out by this mafia. So less and less there is to buy, less and less. So it's horrible. It's horrible. I don't know what to tell you. And I will end by saying we should be paying attention to this. We should be paying attention because it is a tragic story of a system that lots of people thought was, they may not have democracy, but they have, good education, they have excellent healthcare, blah, blah, blah. This was never true. But today don't get sick in Cuba. That's all I got to say. And if you have kids, educate them somewhere else at home or whatever, because everything is breaking down. It's a system that is bankrupt. Doesn't even have the courage of its own convictions anymore. It doesn't even believe that it's revolutionary. It's just a mafia. The people in charge want to stay in charge, and it's good at that. It's very good. It can mobilize thugs to beat you up. I mean, they have many protests at night. Almost always in the poor sides, neighborhoods of both Eastern Eastern Cuba and Santiago, and I think on the outskirts of Havana. And what they do is they take video, and then the next day the thugs come and they figure out who these people are from the video, and they take them away, or they beat them up. They're good at that. They're excellent at repression. They're terrible at government.
What do you think the geopolitical ramifications are for the U.S. to have an island in such 90 miles from our shores, from Key West, in such dire straits, and reaching out? They're going to reach out to someone to help them, and it seems like Russia is happy to fill the void.
No, Russia's going like this. Russia is not interested. They're taking advantage of the Cubans. They have Cuban mercenaries fighting in the Russian army. And the Russian fleet, I think, is once again, going to, there was a submarine in Havana Harbor and stuff like that. But the Cubans are expecting big things from Russia the way that Castro got from the Soviet Union. The Russians are not delivering, and they have their own problems, all right? So they're not bailing them out. The Venezuelans who picked up the tab after the Soviets left, they're too much of a mess themselves. The Cubans are on their own right now. And the geopolitical consequences are pretty clear. They're happening right now. According to the Cuban government itself, which always underestimates, about 1 million people have left the island in the last 2 years. That's about 15% of the population. So a huge amount like that.
All the young people. So you stop and think, why do they let that happen? Well, it's all the people that could potentially overthrow you if they leave the island.
Right. Anybody who is going to be investing their energies on a risk-taking overthrow of the government is going to take their energies into a risk-taking wind up of the United States. And by the way, I don't know who all these people are, but I know for a fact, because the regime is collapsing, at the edges. So many of the regime thugs, the people that they used to beat up others that I was talking about, have ended up in Miami. So you have people who were essentially oppressors, and we're letting them in because we have this crazy immigration policy where anybody who shows up, you're okay, right, without being vetted. So there are actual communist thugs in Miami who just basically felt Cuba, even working for the regime, wasn't worth it. It was going to be better for them here in the United States. It's pretty amazing.
I don't know what the answer is politically as to what can or should be done from the U.S. perspective, but
I don't think we can do anything. I think we can just wait them out. This whole thing is going to collapse, and it's not going to take 10 years. It's going to be 2 or 3.
I hope so for the people of Cuba, because the people I met were wonderful. The island is beautiful. We talked about it before we started rolling. The architecture, from a distance, when you squint your eyes, is amazing. But when you get up close and you're walking down the streets of Old Havana,
yes,
you realize that there are boards holding up all of the balconies, and that many of them you can see where the balconies have literally collapsed right onto the sidewalk.
Yeah, every day one of those things. Yeah, it collapses. Yeah, there's an old, actually, it's not even that new now. It's like maybe 10, 12 years old, documentary done by a Cuban dissident from inside the island called The Art of Making Ruins. And he said, Fidel Castro kept talking about invasion and wars for so long, and we didn't get that. We didn't get an invasion from the United States. So I think he decided to make Havana into a ruin anyway, as if the invasion had happened. And then he walks through all these neighborhoods, that used to be, you could tell, amazingly wonderful, and are now ruins. That's what they are. You might as well be in ancient Egypt.
Agreed. Well, I hope it gets better for their sake. And thank you for taking a detour into what is probably more your regular topic.
My favorite subject.
Before you leave, I want to invite you to join my Global Macro Update newsletter. This is a free service that comes out every Tuesday and Friday. I'll send you an email with my latest thoughts on geopolitics, economics, the markets, along with a link to the latest interview and a transcript. If you'd like to join us, hit the link in the description below or go to globalmacroupdate.com and join over 100,000 other Global Macro Update readers. I hope you join us. I'm Ed D'Agostino. Thanks for watching.